A certain young man, a computer programmer by trade, with a really cool car, finally got some vacation time. He decided to take off on a long driving vacation from Kansas City, Kansas, to Pueblo, Colorado. He'd never seen that part of the country, but knowing the lay of the land and how few and far between the gas stations would be, he meticulously watched his gas gauge. Unbeknownst to him, though, the gauge had broken the last time he filled up, and it stuck on full. Being the trusting soul he was, and a guy who likes to do things quickly, the young man took the advice of the station owner and took a shortcut, where, unfortunately, about halfway across, he promptly ran out of gas. He had absolutely no idea where he was, except on the so-called shortcut. Not realizing he was out of gas, he looked under the hood, but that didn't really help much. Because while he knew a lot about computers, he knew absolutely nothing about cars. And wouldn't you know it, his cell phone wouldn't work either. No signal, no tower in sight, no bars, no can you hear me now, nothing. So he sat in his cool car, which was now a hot car, dejected, hoping anyone else would come along on this so-called shortcut. As luck would have it, he spotted the cloud of dust first. Coming down the road was a BMW. It turned out to be driven by a very well-to-do woman. There was a fish on the trunk of her car and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. She even stopped, but then when she found out he needed a ride, she said she was in a hurry to get to her daughter's house. It was her grandson's birthday, and she had an ice cream cake that she didn't want to melt. Besides that, they'd invited their priest, and she didn't want to be late. So, still mouthing excuses, she got back in the car and left him there. She didn't even offer to call anyone. Still dejected, the young man just sat back in his car. About an hour later, he saw another cloud of dust and watched as a traveling evangelist drove up in a car with a "Honk if you love Jesus" bumper sticker on the back. The preacher couldn't help either. He was on his way to preach a 5-day revival. He was already running late because the Lord had told him to help someone on the side of the road that morning, and he'd already pulled over 12 times, and he didn't have time for any more. And that's why he was taking the shortcut. He didn't offer to help, and he didn't have any gas. He did offer the young man a granola bar, and he did get out and preach a whopping good 10-minute sermon about praying your way through the problems. And he gave a great blessing for the car and the young man's vacation. But then, he just drove off in his car with the "Honk if you love Jesus" bumper sticker on the back. And that was it. Now, even more dejected, the young man wondered if he'd ever find anyone to help. Worn out, hungry, thirsty, and tired, the young man just sat there. What else could he do? It was at least 20 miles to the last town, and he had no idea how far it was to the next town. And then he heard something. He actually heard the low rumble of the bass before he saw the cloud of dust. It was the unmistakable boom of a tricked-out automobile with the big bass speakers, the kind you feel more than hear. Then he saw the cloud of dust and the truck. It was a big wrecker, nearly bouncing down the road to the beat of the music. It pulled up, and out jumped an even younger man, dressed in baggies and a hooded sweatshirt. His nose and both of his ears were pierced. He had a tattoo on both wrists. Not only did he offer to help, but he gave the stranded young man a fresh bottle of ice-cold water, a ham sandwich, and some cookies. The wrecker driver assessed the situation and declared that the young man had simply run out of gas. So the wrecker driver gave the young man a can of gas. It wasn't much, but it would probably be enough to get him to the next gas station. He even agreed to follow along behind and make sure he really did have enough gas to make it. And if not, they'd stop and either siphon some from the wrecker, or the wrecker driver would tow the young man in his car to the station so he could fill up. The wrecker driver even radioed ahead and had the part for the broken gas gauge waiting, so the owner of the gas station could repair it before the young man left. So, munching on a sandwich, drinking some cold water, and knowing that he had a guardian angel following, the young man headed on down the road, with the wrecker bouncing to the beat behind him. The wrecker, by the way, had no fish decal and no "Honk If You Love Jesus" bumper sticker. But it had something else. Something much more important. That wrecker had a true neighbor and a disciple behind the wheel. A disciple who was listening to loud, booming rap music.